Hi there, my name is John Crowley. I work with the Harvard Humanitarian Initiative and the National Defense University. Much of my work is in the interface between the formal and the informal, between the civilian and the military, and how we begin to look at creating essentially an API between these two worlds. Most often, disasters in some form involve bringing these worlds together. We saw it with crisis mappers coming in, integrating with the formal units. We saw it with issues of trying to get civilian and military. There is a huge number of problems here. Policy is not in place. DoD has started to make some changes. 3000.05 and 8220.02 are two directives that begin to get at what we can do in terms of sharing information and participating. But as we saw, it's not yet working. Trust is not there. Information flows, just not working. The work that some commanders have is a novice. It's the first and last disaster of their careers. That is not something that we need to sustain. What if this actually worked? What if we got the experience of the NGO community, the UN community, tied into the power of the military capacity? What if we could take all of these folks and instead of having discontinuity and discord, focus them on the affected population? My work is trying to figure out how we bridge this gap. Some of this is through work that we're doing through National Defense University, some through the Naval Postgraduate School, some through simple training policies, training problems. I lead or curate a set of experiments at Camp Roberts, which is a partnership with the Naval Postgraduate School. It's looking at the art of the possible. What can we do? What can we set up? How can we do this ethically? How can we make sure that this is focused in on removing the technical obstacles to making things happen? We have an extreme laboratory. It's an incredible space where we can fly UAVs in autonomous mode. We can do things that would otherwise be impossible. And we're trying to make a capability real. One of the things that we're working on is a symbol of this community. We tried during Haiti to have an imagery workflow. We wanted to get things declassified out on tile services. We're trying to reconstitute an old project that's the raster equivalent to OpenStreetMap called Open Aerial Map. We're also working on what Kate had alluded to was a software stack. How can we embed the ideas of our community inside of a device or a stack that we can get out into a disaster and put it not only to the humanitarians, but to the host nation? One example of this was something that we sent to Afghanistan for the elections, both in 2009 and 2010, and looking at how we took 0.8 centimeter NGA imagery, combined it with an SMS stack, combined it with GeoCommons, combined it with OpenStreetMap, combined it with walking papers, and got out in the field. Todd Huffman, who's here, can talk about this. But let's look at what is next. What challenges do we need to confront if this is going to work? How do we make this so that the work becomes something that we can do and be talking about next year? One thing is a packet blanket. When a disaster happens, communications is one of the most important things to get in place. What if we were able to blanket the theater in packets, SMS, IP, and have it available to everybody within 24 hours? What if, like we saw with many maps are fairly static, it's a dynamic situation that we're mapping on the ground. How do we solve this problem? Can we get a time slider in OpenStreetMap? Can we get a time slider for all of our data, not just geospatial? How do we look at the streams that are coming across and begin to understand from them who are the leaders in that community that's trying to restore itself? How do we reach out to them? How do we connect them with resources that they need? Can we build an emergent leader map, essentially? One other thing we saw with Pakistan was the ability to reach out and have reach-back support so that people in the field with low bandwidth can reach back to people who have enormous resources to them, but they need to know what questions to answer and they need to know what questions to ask. Can we create an open crisis map? Similarly, if we're going to do that, it would be helpful to know what are the baselines that we're trying to compare the new pattern of the disaster against. Can we create essentially a map of those gaps across any of the sectors that we're dealing with, and then any of the problems that we encounter? If we're going to do that, how do we know what's a pathology? In jazz, if you're going to know what someone's playing in a fairly remote or sort of out there improv, you have to know the theme. How do we do that for a disaster? How do we understand what the patterns are in the data itself? And in this jazz, if we could come to a point where we know the patterns, can we begin, like jazz musicians, to understand how we can begin to better improv together because we're all playing from the same songbook instead of everybody having a different tune? One of the things that we're working on at HHI is crisis dynamics, which is to try and pull this all together and begin to understand the underlying mechanisms of disasters, from the patterns, from the flows, and from the people that are involved, so that we can all begin to work together more effectively. I'd love to talk with you more. This is a very short presentation. Thank you very much for your time.